Ah, here we are live. Good evening, one and all. Good afternoon, as the case may be. Well, depending where you are and where you're watching this, welcome, one and all. Of course, as always, please do remember to click the like and share button. Like I say, share it out as often as possible. And of course, I have the man himself, the man, the myth, the legend himself, the man who is single-handedly, well, I say single-handedly, but trying to stop the Tories. So, Josh, why don't you sort of introduce yourself and tell us more about sort of the movement forward and stop the Tories as well?
Awesome, thank you. Yeah, so I'm Josh, Josh Russell, Josh Forward on the internet, so I'm the coordinator of the movement forward. We're kind of a proportional representation campaign disguised as a tactical voting campaign. We first started actually back in 2015 with a platform called Swap My Vote, which a lot of people have seen. But we've kind of progressed much more pointedly now to the point where we've got a website called StopTheToriesVote, which is a tactical voting platform. We launched that last year for the first time for local elections, which is such a mammoth task compared to the general elections. So like, we're looking forward to the general elections. It's going to be a lot easier to build this website again. Not build it again, but, yeah. Oh, I can't hear you, Ollie.
Well, there we go. My own home ward has been split into 3 seats now. I think we've got Barnsley North, Barnsley South, and Penistone East West. I think it's sort
for the general election.
Yeah, so that's the general election, but right. That's sort of split down into in that I think you have 30, maybe more, council seats.
Oh, I mean, the numbers are crazy. Yeah, so if you imagine you've got 650 MPs around the country, right? So 650 constituencies, and like you're saying, the boundaries of those constituencies have changed, which means that the previous results kind of are not relevant, because if you've lost 10,000 voters in a place and they've gone somewhere else, the results for the last election aren't necessarily representative of the current makeup of that constituency. So it's really thrown people out. But we're on it. We've managed to deal with that, so that's not an issue. But councils, yeah, obviously, you have thousands of councillors around the country, and then if you think about every ward in every council, sometimes up to 3 councillors in a ward, so thousands of councillors, yeah, tens of thousands of candidates. So it's a much bigger task, and you've got all sorts of things, like if there are 3 council seats up for election in a particular ward, but one party is only standing 2 candidates, then you've got to think, okay, well, who came after them, and oh no, they've got 2 candidates as well, which one do we tell you to vote for? So yeah, it's quite difficult, and we tend to play it safe, and if we really can't tell you what to do, then we say that on the website, but we also provide lots of data that you can look at too.
Yeah. So I just want to say to sort of everyone sort of joining us this evening, if you've got any questions for Josh about tactical voting or anything that we're talking about, please do sort of put them in the chat. Like I say, I will keep an eye on the chat to put them to Josh. Like I say, I can see, of course, Labour Socialists here, and of course, Puninator. Of course, where is the bowler hat? Well, it is just, as always, just out of reach, unfortunately. You can see, my magnificent widow's peak on display.
my greys are really showing. I was going to shave this afternoon, but you got me too early.
I know. It's like,
I've just opened the chat up as well, so I'll keep an eye.
Professional. I need professional makeup.
Absolutely.
But for those who don't know, I think, Josh, can you explain what is sort of tactical voting and why is it sort of the best way to sort of get rid and sort of stop the Tories?
Yeah, so tactical voting really is, a symptom of our really, really poor electoral system, basically. I think I remember a stat a while back that said that 70% of people's votes in general elections just don't count towards the outcome. So if you're in a very safe seat, there's almost no point in you showing up, and that goes for a safe seat of all the parties, really. But tactical voting in places where it's really close, so say where, the vote might be split quite evenly and then one party just edges it, you can actually just look at the previous electoral data, compare that to polling, look at other trends in each constituency, and then say, well, look, if voters from this party just voted for this party this time, then the other party that none of us like wouldn't have won with 2 or 3% of the vote. So it's a way of kind of efficiently distributing our votes to more represent the intent of things like the polls. Because if you actually look at it, the Conservatives have never won a majority of the vote in this country, literally never. But they've been in power for 2/3 of the time for the last 100 years, right? Even though the majority of people have been voting against them. And that pretty much goes for if you include votes for like UKIP and the Brexit Party as well, right? Because they've just taken votes away from the Tories mostly. So tactical voting kind of sucks to have to do. Really, we should be able to vote for what we want and for who we want and the policies that we care about and the things that are actually going to, help our country thrive. But as a tool right now, it is just simply a way of distributing our vote to reflect more the intent of our vote against a thing. What's really frustrating for me is that actually this happens all the time, right? It's just that we haven't won most of the time.
Yeah.
We've always been showing up against the Tories, essentially. And so what we're really doing, what I've said at the beginning about this being a proportional representation campaign, is kind of highlighting this fact, right? By using tactical voting, by saying, yeah, we can make your vote count now, but really your vote should actually really count towards things you want to vote for, not just efficiently against things you want to vote against. And then behind it, obviously, there's a lot of spreadsheets. And all we're really doing is whacking a postcode search on the front of a spreadsheet. That's kind of it.
So I think one of the questions certainly to sort of put forward, I think, because that leads on into this. What stats? So you're looking at. So what is the data that you're sort of looking at to sort of determine who is sort of the party that sort of gets that vote on the tactical scale?
Yeah, I mean, it's really easy. I mean, the first time I did anything this time around was 2022, and I basically did a really short video, and it's on Twitter, I think, of me browsing Wikipedia, right? So looking at your wards and looking at Wikipedia and seeing all the previous, voting results, election results for your ward. And there's another website that Democracy Club make, great community, Democracy Club, where you can find out which ward you're in and who your candidates are. So really, really simply for councils, there's no ward level polling data. So all you've really got to go on is previous election results, if previous election results exist, because boundary changes happen with wards as well. So for the council elections, it really is quite rudimentary, but we're setting the thresholds of our confidence, let's say, quite strict. So if it's close, we're saying, look, it's close. We can't really tell you. If it's not close, then it's more obvious. We can say, really put all your votes to this party. But like I said earlier, the complication is that there's more than one candidate up and 3 seats in each ward. So yeah, you should really have a look at the website, because in some places, it's like 2 Labour, 1 Lib Dem, because there are only 2 Labour, even though they were the obvious tactical vote. They came second last time or whatever, but there aren't 3 Labour candidates.
Yeah.
So it's quite complicated. For the general election, it's way easier in some ways. However, of course, the boundary changes have happened.
Yeah.
And the polls, so there are some national polls that kind of show, and we've all seen the graphs, right? Like Labour's going to get 450 seats, 500 seats, whatever it is. But they don't go down to constituency level often. So actually you do need to look at each constituency to make sure that there isn't something different going on.
Yeah.
So in quite a few seats, it's really, really obvious. In others, you do need to look at other things. Now, when I say look at other things, and so I think getting to the real point of the question, previous results in polling, if it's clear, great, right? But then you have things like, can we try and work out what are the target seats for each party? They don't publish that, but they do make hints in all sorts of ways. So then if it's close, you can say, but actually the Lib Dems aren't really trying here. So, yeah, it is the Labour Party, even though they might only be a couple of % ahead in the polling, that kind of thing. So then there needs to be some sort of public evidence for that kind of stuff, obviously. We don't just take hearsay and incorporate that, and all our data will be available. So you can see if we've made something that overrides a result and poll kind of decision, there will be a line that says, we manually made a decision based on this information that we'll provide. Another thing, of course, is stand downs, stand asides, illnesses. Sometimes candidates, they stand down purely because they can't stand it anymore for some sort of personal reason. There isn't time to get a new candidate in. The polling cards are already done. right? All of that stuff. So like those kinds of things. Again, if there's a public domain piece of information that we can use, we'll use that to get it in there.
And in fact,
sorry, go on.
in fact, we saw that in the Teesside mayoral election with Ben Houchen, the Green candidate,
Right.
sort of dropped out recently. So that was something that I think will be a bit of an interesting, I think, contest, considering what was his margin of victory. It was like, what, 70 something percent. It was really big when he won. It was sort of like almost the last big Tory victory in many ways was Houchen's victory.
Hopefully there'll be no more.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, so that it can definitely happen. And so I suppose my we try and publish as much as we can on the website. If there's something there that's not quite right or doesn't feel right or whatever, I mean, do tell us, and do shout outs on Twitter and whatever it might be, and we'll try and look into it. We can't just take people saying, "Oh, but I think it should be this party." Like, okay, we need some evidence. We can't. Yeah. It's not vibes and feels, as they say, right?
You've got to have something to back it up, because I suppose there is that element where if it is this party that is going to win the seat, it's how then do you convince other people in that seat or that area who might not be that party to sort of switch their vote. I suppose really at the end of the day that's the real big challenge, to sort of get people to sort of change the vote.
And again, to highlight how stupid it is we have to do this as well, right? Like, I really want this to be the last time we have to do tactical voting. I really want our votes to actually count. And if this project does two things, which is to get the Tories out and explain to people, I'll have this like aha moment of like, oh my God, yeah, like my vote actually doesn't really count. And I kind of knew that because I wasn't really bothered before. So yeah, like convincing people, absolutely. That's kind of why we're doing the local elections as well. Like the local elections, it's going to create results, but hopefully it's an awareness exercise too.
Something else that we're going to go back to is the questions, because I think Punanator brings up a good point here, because it's not necessarily a council seat, but it's the police, the PCC, so it's what the police commissioner chair, I think it is, seat. And these aren't, as he says, they aren't necessarily big political appointments, but do you think that the Tories losing these will sort of have a grander effect down the line, I suppose?
Yeah, the PCC stuff, I mean, there's a whole range of thoughts about it, right? Like a lot of people don't really know what they do. I don't 100% know what they do, but they are elected. So, presumably that is political, right?
Yeah.
In some form, even if they're not representative of a party, it's a political thing in some senses. Will it have an impact? I mean, we want to try and help people make good decisions in every single type of elected position there is in the country, right? And that can extend quite far. PCCs, in this case, are going to be the only election that a lot of people have, because they don't necessarily have a council election or a mayor election this year, or they're not in London, so they don't have the London Assembly, which we're also doing this year. So we're trying to include PCCs, although it's not on the website yet, because the data is not available in a really useful manner. So we're having to like manually go through it, and we're only a small voluntary team, so we just have it's in the list. But the reason we want to do it is because then it means that every single person in England and Wales will have something they can do on May the 2nd. But yeah, in terms of the impact it will have, I mean, the whole thing is a big message, right? Like, I think what we realized last time was that there's a huge appetite essentially to do anything they can to get rid of anything like vaguely related to the Tories. And I think the Tories know that, right? I mean, I guarantee that they've had meetings about us, right? I guarantee it. And we've seen, like someone sent me some screen grabs of some Tory councillor Facebook pages where they're all waving goodbye, because I think they kind of know what's going to happen, because last year the Tories said, oh, we could lose up to 1,000 councillors. And we were like, okay, all right, we'll get on it. And 1,063 lost their seats.
I mean, I think this is going to be after like May the 3rd. I think all bets are off.
Yeah.
Once I think Rishi Sunak's going to find himself in a very, very big troubling spot. I mean, there's going to be a lot of angry local conservative organizations out there. Very angry local conservative organizations.
I agree. And, also, if there are fewer conservative councillors, then that means fewer teams on the ground for the general election as well. Like, what incentive have they got to show up and help their MP candidate? you know, if they're not even in office themselves.
Yeah.
You know, so they will lose support as well. But also, frankly, you know, even though there are clearly, you know, good people still in the Conservative Party, especially at that level, you know, maybe not at the parliamentary level really anymore, but those people have made their choices, you know, and if they continue to associate with something that they know is poisonous, like they've been reading the same news we have. Do you know what I mean? Like, they could go independent, and I'm sure a lot of them have. You know, so this is their bed they've made in many ways.
I mean, local politics is a vastly different area of politics. I mean, something that matters in sort of, you know, my town, if you go next door to sort of Wakefield or you go to sort of Sheffield, vastly different concerns, vastly different needs and requirements. And it's everything's always different. I mean, in Barnsley in particular, it has been for quite a while a very, very big Labour dominated town. And you've seen all the other sort of prime parties from the Lib Dems, the Greens, even the Conservatives saying, oh, look, what you need is you need us on the council to hold the Labour council to account. And that is always, almost always the main tactic they have deployed every single election to a point where last local election, we have 3 Lib Dem councillors going up for re-election this year. And the chances don't look too good in particular when it comes to this. So it'll be very, very interesting to see what happens on the local council again. But sometimes I think people at a local level, when it comes to local politics, are very, very sort of set in their ways. So I think that is, again, I think getting people to switch vote at a local level can be quite hard, because I think there's a lot of attachment to that. But we have seen in Conservative Home, there was a piece about a local Conservative councillor complaining about the fact when they go door to door, it is national issues that people are talking about. And it's the council funding. And it's their party that they've been with who have been cutting council funding, which is now having problems on their council. And they can't talk about that because they're sort of seen as then sort of having a go at their own party. So they're having their own, I think, incredible hard problems to deal with. So
yeah, absolutely. I mean, you know, one of the things about the nature of local politics is that it's not really clear which particular politicians at which level are responsible for what things that you might be experiencing, right? And how that works from a financial point of view, from a policy point of view. Are people paying attention to the voting that goes on in their local councils as well, or are they just seeing the outcomes? You know, I mean, there's all sorts of challenges. I mean, so I live in Brighton, and Brighton, you know, very green place. You know, we have Caroline Lucas as an MP down here. But we've also had quite a big presence of the Greens on the council too. But it hasn't been a Green council, right? They just have a lot of seats, and it looks like it's a Green council, and people talk about it as if it's a Green council. But actually, there's been a few Tory councillors as well sitting there blocking as much as they can, right? And then all the fingers get pointed at the Green Party. And it's like, well, the council's made up of more than just them. And actually, when you look at the votes, you know, the other parties are trying to do something, but there's this little cabal of blue seats just getting in the way, and then going on social media complaining about all the stuff that, you know, they've been blocking essentially. So it's all kind of, you know, hypocrisy and doublespeak in many ways. But yeah, I mean, I think that there needs to be clearer like understanding of what the council is actually responsible for, what your local MP is actually responsible for, what is going on at a national level that affects local issues as well. I used to work in government procurement for my sins, and on the technology side. So we were trying to help government make good technology decisions. This is a long time ago, by the way. So like recently, you know, a bit of a mess, but I've got some unique insights. And you know, local government was actually outside of our scope, so we weren't able to work on that, right? But every local government, you know, they are basically, you know, a lot of what they do is the same thing that every local government has to do. So picking up the rubbish, doing recycling, you know, they're not unique problems, but they are given those problems to solve on their own, which means that they can't necessarily spend their time solving the problems that only their community has, right? And you know, that is for all sorts of reasons. But you know, you start to think, when you're looking at this from the procurement point of view that I was, like, why isn't there just some sort of national trash picking up service that, you know, actually is just paid for on some national way. It's not a special thing. Why is the councils, having to do their own procurement processes and all that, and work out which things get recycled based on which contracts they got with some local company that doesn't recycle a particular type of plastic? These are the things that people all complain about. They're common problems that a local council, frankly, shouldn't have to be, spending a huge amount of its time looking at. And that's just one of hundreds of things.
Yeah.
Mental health and healthcare generally is another huge thing that obviously affects local communities. Could be solved at national levels way more efficiently. This is a long conversation.
No, it's fine, because this is I'm real there with you, because I think there is a lack of knowledge from most people about what their local council really is responsible for, what it is actually sort of there to do. And one of the things that always concerns me is the turnout for local council elections. Incredibly low. You're talking, I think nationally it's between 25 and 30%, depending where you go. In my hometown, it was 27, I think, the last local election. And when you look at the actual numbers, you're talking like a couple of hundred votes. And sometimes if you were to add the people who didn't vote and they went out and voted, all of a sudden you are seeing big switches in your local town who gets that seat. So there is, I think, just a lot of, again, I think it's knowledge that people just lack about what it is and sort of what a local councillor does and how and why a local council is there. And I think it is teaching people that. And I think I always bring out this book, but Paint Your Town Red, I think is a really good book that goes through sort of what your local town council can do, and especially from like a local economic point of view, what economic power your local council has. So it can buy first and foremost from like its own sort of locality, and we've actually seen this in Yorkshire. There's a really good example of a public, or sort of a public procurement, but it sort of not. It straddles the line. But the whole idea was it was set up because called the YPO, and it's set up by different sort of numbers of councils, and all its job is to do is to be a buyer for school materials.
Right.
And it supplies all sort of the school materials in pretty much South Yorkshire, West Yorkshire. If you have gone to school, you have probably, your school probably buys from them. But it's a council-run, owned and operated business. And people don't even realize that's there, that was set up by councils to sort of help their procurement in getting those school supplies. So there's a lot of stuff councils can and in any ways can't do, but it's a good example of something councils could do. It's just lack of knowledge, I think.
Yeah, I mean, you're really touching on the whole kind of like, what is taxation and economies of scale really about, right?
Yep.
The whole point about taxation really, I think, is to be able to, have powerful, bulk buying essentially of the services that your entire society needs, rather than having to go and sort all this stuff out individually. And of course, sometimes that just, the natural extension of that is to nationalize various things that you all need, where there's no competitive advantage to making it a private situation. And like councils learn this, obviously because they're right at the coalface, very, very quickly, but often, it's quite a politically challenging thing to do. I remember seeing this is slightly related, but I remember seeing an interview with some Republican senator on Fox News once, and they were talking about privatization of healthcare and that kind of stuff, and he was saying, well, if people, want to get cheaper healthcare, a lot of people can get it through the company they work for, because of course they have like, company-wide agreements, don't they? And to her credit, right, this news anchor, she said, well, if that makes sense, why doesn't the whole city just buy healthcare? Right? And he was like, oh no, that wouldn't work, obviously, because she was just making that natural connection of like, oh yeah, but if you scale this up even further, you provide for more people and it gets cheaper too. It's like, and you can see the clogs whirring a little bit.
Yeah.
Right? And it's like, oh, if you did this at a national level, wow, then it'd be really cheap and everyone would have it, wouldn't they? And all the bureaucracy would go away and everything else.
Yeah. I mean,
But, yeah.
I follow. I don't know if you know the Majority Report.
Yeah,
I think
yeah.
they do some
Sam Cedar.
excellent stuff on
Yeah.
like American politics, and something they always bring up is the Dems when it comes to sort of a national level are really really good, and then you go down to sort of what they call down sort of ballot voting, where it's like your local like county crime commissioner. I mean, America has a lot more elected sort of positions than we do
Yeah,
in the
school
UK.
boards as well, things like that.
Yeah, and they have sort of almost rediscovering in a way how important these positions are.
Yeah.
So I think you're seeing sort of that renaissance happen in sort of the realization of how important it is to sort of vote in your locality, and how important it is the makeup of your local state house, or again your local school board is in those areas. And I'm hoping that we can eventually get there ourselves in many ways. But I think one of the big challenges we are facing is sort of the centralization of local government, and that's something I would like to see sort of that helped. Obviously, this election we've got 11, I believe it is. No, so no, it's 10. Is it 10 new regional mayors? I think.
Oh God, I don't even know. I'm so
Yeah,
deep in it. I've not been
we've
looking at that kind
we've
of thing.
got lots of new regional mayors opening up at this in this stage of this election. So there's going to be a lot more of those floating around. But of course, the two big conservative ones that we've just mentioned. Obviously, there's Ben Houchin in Teesside, and then there's Andy Street. So, what is your take on sort of these current elections? What do you think to sort of these? What are their chances in the upcoming election?
I mean, I don't want to speculate too much, but like, and it's got very political, hasn't it? As well, like, obviously. But there are some wedge issues that I think the Tories are trying to use, right? Just like the ULEZ thing, of course. So what are their chances? I mean, honestly, who really knows what's going to happen? I think what you were alluding to earlier about turnout, I think, is one of the keys. And it's like what we're trying to do with tactical voting is to say, actually there is a way your vote can count, and then maybe that would encourage you to show up, right? So chances, I mean, yeah, I don't know. We could pull up some polling and have a look. I don't know. We should have prepped for that. But also I think people often don't know exactly what their mayor is for and what their mayor is responsible for. And there are some high profile ones that get a lot of blame for a lot of stuff, obviously, right? When Johnson was mayor, I blame him basically for wasting a load of money on a bridge. And I think a lot of people do as well. But then he claims the Boris bikes that weren't even his idea, So what does a mayor do? I don't know. And then, going up and down the ballot, is that what the phrase was? Yeah. Like, there are elected positions all over the place, way more in America, like you say, that are actually are in quite interestingly powerful positions as well. And quite often we ignore it. We just ignore it. In America, if you look at the other end of the kind of a similar problem, but another end of the scale, presidential elections are huge. Everyone pays attention to that, and primaries are tiny. And the primaries are when the Senate's flip away from the president usually as well, right? So all of a sudden you're now blaming the president for stuff that actually the Senate, because the Senate is not with them anymore, is responsible for. So yeah, we just don't pay attention. Republicans and conservatives tend to, right? We don't need to talk about it too much, but Project 2025, Steve Bannon's project, they've been working on that for years. And it's not elected positions, but the point is that they are looking way ahead, and they are looking at positions of authority and responsibility that are unelected, right? So that if they win, Steve Bannon's going to put in 50,000 employees all around federal and state government on day one. And he basically says that was our mistake last time, not doing that. His mistake last time was not doing a coup, right? Basically, do you know what I mean? But the point is that in America, they really, you look at all the stuff going on in schools at the moment around, sex ed and book banning and that kind of stuff. Who goes up for election for the school boards? It's often the Republicans. And who shows up to the vote in those? It's often the Republicans. And ironically, just like in this country as well, it's actually them that's in the minority. We're the majority, and not to say that Labour is the majority, but like the centre left is the majority and always has been. And even if you ask a lot of conservative or right wing voters on policy, turns out they're quite left wing. Right? Do you know what I mean? They care about the NHS as well, just like we do. It's just that they've been tricked into thinking there's different solutions that involve selling it off.
I think this is it, sort of working, because I've always said, I will be quite happy to sort of work with someone who's not sort of necessarily sort of ideologically aligned with me if it's for a policy that's going to have good outcomes. I've said, if like David Cameron and even Boris Johnson's idea of levelling up, or even the Northern Powerhouse, if they had actually done it, they'd actually followed through, it would have been a good idea. I mean, the levelling up white paper, the first 2 chapters of it are absolutely amazing. when you read them, they're like, oh wow, yeah, we don't have a proper industrial strategy. Government actually needs to sort of invest in these sort of proper upcoming technological areas. And then the 3rd chapter, the Treasury chapter, when the first 2 chapters have specifically said we require this amount of money, it's Rishi Sunak going, maybe not.
Yeah. I mean, when you go and check with your sponsors, right?
Yeah.
It's like, no, don't do that. Where's our payday? Yeah, I mean, this is the thing. It'd be so easy for the Tories to win the next election, wouldn't it? They just have to do something good. Will they do it?
I just recorded a video just before we came on there. Will come out tomorrow about David Frost has written a piece in the Telegraph about, we're about to lose Brexit because we could have done all these things we could do to save Brexit. And you're like, well, hold on, you're in power now. You've been in power. You could have done all these things. Why aren't you doing them? And I think there's going to be a lot of whining and gnashing of teeth after the next election about Brexit by these people. But that's another conversation for the time.
Yeah, I mean, in many ways, this general election coming up is a Brexit election again, but it's going to be an election where no one mentions Brexit, right?
Yeah.
But of course, largely the things we're going to be arguing about, and largely the things that are going wrong at the moment, are absolutely Brexit related. Yeah. But no one's going to want to mention the words.
Yeah, something I want to bring up to see what your thoughts on this are. I've always said the whole reason sort of Labour aren't talking about Brexit is because I think if they do start talking about it, this will give the Tories almost a huge ammunition to sort of start fighting back, because you saw that big Brexit bloc sort of form together, and then once they got Brexit, they sort of broke apart because they didn't really know what type of Brexit they wanted, so it sort of disintegrated. But I think if Labour did start talking about undoing some of like the Brexit destruction or stuff like that, I think then the danger then becomes, let's stop infighting because now we've got an external enemy in potential Labour. Let's reunite. I think you could see a reuniting of the Tory party on that front. So, what do you think?
No, 100%. I mean, they're really, really good at getting behind an idea that's going to make them a lot of money, right? I mean, that's basically what they're good at, and they fight about everything else, right? Even if they disagree with each other, it kind of doesn't matter because they've got a single goal. It's like, what can we extract from the state? Essentially, that's their goal. So yeah, I mean, the paradox of Brexit was that as soon as it happened, every day from then onwards, we were just getting closer to rejoining again. If they wanted us to shut up about Brexit, they shouldn't have done it in the first place, basically, right? Should Labour be talking about it? No. What's the point, right? It will just create another wedge. It won't let people talk about, a whole range of other policies, and then join the dots themselves between those policies and Brexit and rejoining the EU. And, frankly, just our standing on the national stage and all that stuff, right? Our international relationships at all. It turns out the planet is a system of different societies that are connected in all sorts of ways. And when you sever those connections, all sorts of things start to fall apart. We've spent hundreds of years making those connections in all sorts of different ways, right? There's a reason for that. And they would argue that, no, that's what we're doing now, global Britain, right? So yeah, you've undone a bunch of stuff. You've cost a lot of money, and you're going to try and put it back and call it something different. Not really, and only put back bits of it poorly, in ways that don't actually replicate what we had before as well. But it's because they do know that is, that the people want those relationships with Europe and the rest of the world. So they are using that idea again to sell a shitty version of that idea. Excuse my French.
Yeah. Right, sorry. Just to sort of go back to sort of questions in the comments, like I say, if you do want put a question to sort of Josh or anything that we've been talking about, like I say, do put in the comments. I will sort of look out to them. I do just want to go to Puninator again, asking a question, sort of asking you what type of sort of PR are you in favor of? Because there's a lot of different versions of sort of PR. Which one do you think yourself would you sort of like to see in the future?
Yeah, so I don't, and this might annoy people, but I don't have a specific answer on this. But I do recognise that obviously proportional representation is an outcome, not a system, right? And I think we need to be clear on that. There isn't a proportional representation system, right? Which I think is what's being alluded to there.
I mean, there are lots of different systems that you see even now. Because we used to have sort of first ranked choice voting for the regional sort of mayors. That's now gone. They've taken that away. It's now first past the post. So that is going to have sort of a big impact on, I think, the upcoming elections as well in these areas. So that'll be a big difference.
Could be a lot of spoiled ballots because of that, because people don't realise it's changed as well. So my really easy answer is we're a member of the Make Votes Matter Proportional Representation Alliance, or PR Alliance, and Make Votes Matter, are one of the leading proportional representation campaigns. I'm sure everyone's heard of them. So you'll find Forward Democracy, which is actually our organisation name, in that list somewhere. They also have a thing called the Good Systems Agreement as well, which is their 10 principles essentially of what they collectively think a good PR system looks like. We are fully on board with that process essentially, right? So we're not pushing our own version of PR. That doesn't necessarily answer the question though. So there are some features that I think are really important. Local connection is something people talk about quite a lot. I would argue that right now, even though our constituencies are smaller than they probably would be under PR, a lot of people, because they didn't actually vote for the winning MP, are not represented by them. It's that simple, right? And in fact, that's the majority of people. So the majority of this country are not currently represented by their local MP, right? One version of PR would be to have much larger constituencies that have multiple MPs, where if you voted for one of the MPs that ended up representing, maybe there's 10 MPs in your large constituency. You voted for the Lib Dems. They've got 3 MPs. You've got a person you can go to, right? And I think that is a way of having a local connection, rather than going to an MP you didn't vote for, who frankly doesn't care about your vote or what you want or what you say. So I think that's a really important thing.
We'll go back to actually 2012, because that was one of the big arguments against, at the time, what was the AV vote. The anti-side, again run by Dominic Cummings, were sort of putting forward at that time that if we sort of switch to this, you will lose your MP in a way. So I think that is something that we have seen sort of connected on, and I'm really glad that is sort of being sort of realized, that people do want that. They want that sort of connection.
Hugely important. I mean, the main one is obviously proportionality, right? The number of, or the percentage of votes a party gets at a national level should be reflected in the percentage of seats or MPs that they get as well, right? So if a party gets 36% of the vote, they should have 36% of the MPs. It's really that simple. I think in all of these systems also, you want to be able to encourage accountability too, right? So there would be no safe seats, or it'd be a lot harder to have a safe seat under PR, meaning that the policy outcomes would have to be much more aligned with what people actually wanted. It's important to say that PR is not a silver bullet, right? None of us think that, okay? I kind of consider it to be a linchpin that other things are reinforced by once you've got proper electability and accountability. Media regulation, I think, is a huge piece of this, because what I just said about how the MPs need to reflect the wishes and outcomes of the electorate largely rests on what the electorate want, which largely rests on how the media behaves, right? If the media is telling people to stop the boats, and that's what people want, then our elections, will also represent that as well, which of course the media know, and so there's a lot of manipulation going up and down this as well. So heavily, a free but regulated media, I think, is hugely important to protect our democracy, essentially. I think another really important thing about any new system, to elect people on is that it's easy, right? It needs to be, you turn up, you vote for who you want. It's that simple. I don't know if you've seen Australian elections. You get a manual, right? And it explains to you how to make your vote. And you've got a couple of different ways of making your vote as well. You can either vote directly for people or you can vote for parties. You can't do both. And you make some choices about that. It's really complicated. And the fact that you have to read a manual, like, mind blowing to me. You still want to just walk in and tick a box, right?
Last local election, in sort of the South Yorkshire mayoral region race we had, we actually got a big leaflet, and I thought it was fantastic. I don't know how much money this was spent on it, but it was just itself fantastic. It was like, this is how you vote. When you walk into a polling booth, this is what you will see. This is what your leaflet will look like. This is how you vote, who you want to win. And then it went through and like, these are all the candidates. This is their like little blurb. You can vote for them on. And I thought just that itself was fantastic. And I think local areas and local councils, even the government, should be actively more engaged in getting people engaged in democracy, understanding what it is. And I've often wondered, should there be an attempt by the central government to sort of create almost its own little thing that goes, this is what UK democracy is. This is how it works. This is what it does. This is why it's important. This is what local councils do. This is what councillors do. This is what a mayor does. This is what a regional mayor does. This is their responsibilities. If you've got this problem, go to this person. If you've got this problem, go to your MP. And I think that is really, really missing in a lot of areas.
No, I agree, and I think anything that's government produced these days will come with its skepticism as well, right? So there's that challenge. I almost feel like that should probably be some sort of independently produced thing. But yeah, I had this idea a while ago about making handbooks. So like every city or every, however you want to slice the country up, has a handbook for how to interact with your local community, and that could be some sort of wiki.
I'll go back to this because that is in here.
Sure.
It's like this.
Yeah, when you showed that earlier. Yeah, but every city is going to have some slight tweaks, right? So you could kind of make that a collaborative kind of thing. I mean, that'd be really interesting. I think, this is how our elections happen here. This is when the next one is. This is who you go to when you've got this kind of problem. This is how the local taxis work. I mean, it could be all sorts of different things, couldn't it? Because every places have got a different taxi company, and some of them are allowed to pick you up in the street, and some of them aren't, and that kind of stuff. Like, you could go very, very deep on this, couldn't you? How does your city work, right?
Yeah, I think that's it. It's the classic tale of regulation. When you start talking about regulation, people turn off very quickly. But you're like, no, this is like really important because
I mean,
the size of your washer could depend like whether your building or scaffolding falls down. So you've got to have like regulation about it. But it's really difficult to talk about and enthuse people about, which is.
There's another huge part of that, and that is about disenfranchisement and what I call, because I'm a bit of a nerd, the various levels of access you have to the society, to the features of society, right? And like a lot of people don't know what is out there available to them, and you just have to look at so many little projects. I used to be a judge on something called the Tech for Good Awards. Did that for like 8 or 9 years, and it was really, really interesting. One of my favorite projects that ever came through that was an app that told you where all the toilets were, right? And it was specifically for people, of course, that might need access to a toilet more than other people and need to know where public toilets are, or for baby changing or whatever it might be, right? Why does that need to exist? Why did we have to come up with that? Why did a team of volunteers have to do that? Why isn't that just a thing? So yeah, I mean, there's all sorts of projects that that could happen, but I think this idea that society is there for us to use and we're part of it, and part of what government should be doing is trying to increase the access we have to what society provides. Would also psychologically make more of a connection to us, to the people around us, the town we live in, and not just some of the few things that we interact with, and that would naturally extend to our local politics and how we affect that too, of course. So I just wanted to touch on another point, if it's okay, about the PR systems, because I think one of the big ones is about selection of candidates, because obviously if you're not if you've got a system where you're not actually selecting a particular candidate, that kind of removes some agency. There's various forms of primaries, I think, that could be done as one level, right? And you might get increased party membership as a result of that.
I think we should bring that in as well. I think bringing in primaries of like candidate selection, I think would be very good.
Yeah,
I think it'd be very good for a lot of different reasons. But yeah,
yeah, and then you could actually incorporate a system where you are voting for candidates as well. So you could have some sort of layer of preferential kind of voting inside your vote for the party as well. I think that gets a little bit complicated, but I do think that that's the fact that you should know which particular people will end up being MPs is a huge important feature. I think it's one of the more complicated ones.
Yeah.
But right now, very few people have a choice in that anyway. And in fact, right now, people tend to vote for a color rather than voting for a person, right? They'll put their tick in the red box or whatever, and don't really know who it is they're voting for. But like a question about whether your vote counts or not right now, it's really simple. You know if your vote counts or not, depending if someone came asking for it or not.
Yeah.
Right. If someone didn't come knocking on your door, then your vote didn't count. It's really that simple, and I feel like under PR, people would be coming and knocking on your door a lot more, and that would give you more of an opportunity to know who they are and talk to them, ask them questions, challenge them, tell them what you care about. So hustings as well, I think would get really interesting.
And online hustings as well. I would love to see more online hustings. Very, very few organizations, when a hustings is done, very, very few of them are online, but those would be very, very good to see them actually put online for more people just to have access to them, really.
Yeah.
So I've got another question. It's sort of someone sort of asked the same sort of question, but I think it sort of leads on to the next one. So the first one is, so Josh, what's your plan for shifting tactical voting into a push for PR?
Yeah.
And then someone else has asked about Martin Arnold. So given that Starmer is against PR, how would you persuade him to adopt it? So I think there's sort of the same question, but that sort of leads on to, obviously we have seen at the Labour conference, PR was sort of pushed for and voted for. And I want to remind people, because I always remind people this, back in the day when Labour PR first started, they were laughed at and told, you will never, ever achieve that.
It'll never happen.
And it's happened. So I feel like there's a shifting of the goalposts now that's happened again.
Always.
Here's the thing, we do it again. We do it at the next Labour conference, then we do it at the next Labour conference, and we keep on doing it. And we keep on campaigning, keep on talking with people, and you keep on changing their minds. And that's really how democracies sort of work. You've got to win sort of hearts and mind campaign. So I'll let you take over those that question. Those questions.
Yeah. So there's a few what I think of as misquotes here, and without wanting to start a huge argument in the chat, the actual quote from Starmer is that it's not a priority, and I agree with that. It actually isn't. Right. The priority right now is our energy bills. For a lot of people, immigration. Cost of living, NHS, the environment, you name it, right? So is it a priority? In a public statement, of course, he's going to say, no, it's not a priority, because he knows that actually for a lot of people, electoral reform is not top of their lists. And he's right. What I'm trying to do is get it up people's lists by connecting how representation is so important to all the other things you care about, right? All the things we've just talked about accountability and policy alignment. Insert representation here is the answer, pretty much, right?
Yeah.
And the fight for representation is the fight we've just been in for hundreds of years. We're still in the fight, So yeah, it's not a priority. I kind of agree with that. In addition to conference voting for it in 2022, wasn't it? Conference voted for it, which, by the way, was hands only, so there's no count, but hands only means that it was essentially just like looking around the room, and it was so obvious that everyone wanted it, that it's through. That was a big moment. And these big moments need reminding of, right? We need to continually say, actually, conference did vote for this. We want it. Unions are on board. Labour members are on board. Labour voters are on board. The local parties, can't remember the acronym, are on board, right? Make Votes Matter and Labour for a New Democracy have been doing an amazing job getting all those groups on board. We need to keep on reminding everybody that that's the case, right? There are MPs on board as well, of course, right? Yes, the cabinet, we still need to get them on board with it, but like, have they committed to anything yet, really? right? So like, what are you, what, even if they commit to it in some fashion, the goalposts might move again. Then really importantly, last year, the National Policy Forum, the Labour's National Policy Forum, which is the group that decides what Labour policy is, put what some people think is a very soft statement, but I don't think would have been a statement at all unless they really meant it, about how the current system is untrusted and doesn't work, right? That some people go, oh yeah, but they didn't say PR, right? And then they say there's no consensus for an alternative, which is the wording, right? I think roughly. And it's like, for me, that's an invitation to create a consensus for the alternative, right? And I think if they weren't looking at the electoral system, if it wasn't going to come up during the first 5 years, they would not be making those kinds of statements. It gives them the ability to, incorporate it.
Yeah, room to maneuver.
Then people will say, oh yeah, but if it's not in the manifesto, they won't do it. It's like, well, that's not entirely the case either. All they need to have is some wording like the current system is flawed that allows them to then, work on that policy and discover along the way what the consensus is. I think they know what the consensus is. They need more public support and evidence. That's what we're trying to build, right? There needs to be public pressure and support for something that, let's face it, is quite bold to do, to change the way we elect our officials. They are going to get a lot of hassle from the press on any version of that, right? We need to make it safe for them to support. We need to make it a no-brainer. We need to make it look like common sense, so this idea that Starmer is against it, there actually isn't any evidence for that. And in fact, there is a video of him during his campaigning for leadership saying that he feels that people know their vote doesn't count, right? I might have quoted that slightly wrong, but that's essentially the quote. We projected it onto Labour conference one year in Brighton, him saying that, right? So he knows, everyone knows. And then there are other people that have done all sorts of, analysis that basically says, they would perpetually be in government if we had PR. Yes, the party structure might change a little bit, but look at the intent of the polling. The right wing should never have had a majority, right? So like it's very, very safe thing to do. And I feel like rather than continually, suggest that Starmer is against it, we should be highlighting how much everyone else is for it, right? Including people in the Labour Party. Instead of basically quoting spokespeople that have been unnamed, which is just so incredibly frustrating for me every day on Twitter to respond to. It's like, can you actually go and find that quote? Can you? Are you sure? Does it say what you think it does? Are you sure? Because I mean, ironically, the headlines on some of the newspapers that there only have been like 2 or 3 of, and you have to go back about 18 months to find them, are saying it was ruled out. Starmer has ruled it out. That's not something he said. It's just literally not something he said, but everyone quotes it.
Yeah. So that's very much sort of covers the Westminster angle of it, but there's also the House of Lords as well. And I think House of Lords reform is something also very, very important to me, because I've always said, I don't know how like a full reformed House of Lords will eventually look at the end of the day. But to me, I think it needs to be turned into sort of a House of Regional Representatives. So to me, you would sort of cut up the UK into its different sort of counties, constituencies, and then you would go, right, every constituency gets like 3 or 4 different people you can vote for, and then that would be sort of voted on by sort of the proportion, and then depending on the proportion, that gets allocated. Maybe sort of you would get, I don't know, South Yorkshire would get, I don't know, like 2 Labour, maybe 1 Lib Dem, or something like that. But that, to me, I think would be something valuable. And seeing like a reformed House of Lords, I think is something that is something we should also look at and aim for as well, because I understand, of course, the importance and the need to change the Westminster system. But sometimes I look at it, and to me, I feel that the House of Lords, when you look at cross polling, especially Conservatives, they want to see House of Lords reform as well. So I often feel sometimes, I've said this on live streams before, I often feel like the first real target should be House of Lords, and then from then you can change go from there, the Westminster system. But I know people differ from me on that. But yeah, tell me what you think about sort of like the House of Lords and maybe how that can be changed.
Yeah.
Is it almost connected to the same as building that consensus for it as well?
I mean, I think the first thing is that they should not be lifetime roles, right? That's the first thing. I don't think there's any democracy where someone gets to make decisions on policy, even if it's just like the Lords do, that should be a job for life. I just think that's ridiculous. That's the first thing. And I would, I mean, probably any reform would mean getting rid of literally all of the Lords that are there right now, right? Otherwise, you're going to have to make some sort of choice about which ones you keep, and that would create its own argument. And I don't think they're really losing a job that they're relying on to pay their rent, are they? So, the vast majority of those people anyway. So that's the first thing. The second thing is, you have an opportunity to think about how representation works in a slightly different way. So you could look at representation from an expertise point of view as well. So, I mean, obviously that's a difficult thing to measure as well, but, so you would have, experts on all the different topics, whether it be the economy, international trade, sport, right? Represented, in a second house of some form. There's an idea that you could have it completely non-party affiliated, independents only. That would be really interesting as well. Why make it another political thing, right? Yeah. I think that would be quite useful. I think also making sure that there's representation across an age range would be really interesting, to make sure that it's not just old white men as usual, right? It was the majority. Regional representation, absolutely. Another dimension is, representation of communities of shared identity of all sorts, right? There should be disabled representation in there, for example. So in many ways, it's an opportunity to have like a citizens' assembly, essentially, right? But with actual power, on policy making, and it's a chance to say, okay, that house over there, they were elected based on what they told you, right? And this house over here are basically being elected to make sure that they don't just do what they want, and that we bring some perspective and experience and expertise to the picture. That's not I don't really have a kind of like, I want the House of Lords like this, because I think it's a really, really complex thing. You're designing an entirely separate
exactly.
thing.
That's always something I say off the top of my head, because ideally that's sort of how I would like to sort of maybe see it. But I will agree, there's a whole different range of things you could do with the House of Lords to create a second elected body. I mean, I'd actually never thought of actually having an independent sort of one. I mean, that itself, that way I agree with it, would be really good to see a non-politically aligned body, and sort of how maybe you would get those people, how would they sort of be elected? Is it sort of then a government fund? Do we look at maybe democracy vouchers? Maybe do you vote for them that way in that term? So there's a lot of stuff,
like a jury as well.
There's a lot of stuff that could be done about a reformed House of Lords. And I think, in a way, it's almost a bigger question about how we do that, because obviously in Westminster we just go, oh, we changed the voting system, and that's it. But the House of Lords, it goes on to, I think, bigger questions about how it becomes structured, about how it changes that. And I don't know if you've ever seen some of the conversations that have happened about asking actual lords sitting in the House of Lords. They all agree the House of Lords needs some sort of reform, but they themselves can't actually agree on what reform it actually needs. So it's very clear something does need to happen there, very, very clearly. And again, maybe it is just bringing more awareness to it. I mean, I think one of the biggest awareness things you could easily bring in the House of Lords. You think that the Tories in Westminster are corrupt? Well, wait till you see the House of Lords.
Look at this room full of unelected bureaucrats, right? I mean,
exactly. I mean, technically, we're a theocracy because we've got bishops.
I mean, they are called lords for a reason. I mean, the other thing is that there are some excellent people in there, of course, right? Jenny Jones is an incredible representative. Chris Renard, a lot of us like, the Lib Dem Lord, he's great. So there are some really good people in there as well. And some, people that were Tory MPs even, we've seen them go into the Lords and be quite different and like a breath of fresh air in some ways. It's really bizarre to watch. I think what I would say on this and on, pretty much any electoral reform where you're changing a system, is, I would say, consider anything being like a version 1, right? Not to say this is how it's going to be now. We've chosen the perfect way of doing it. We need to build in systems of measuring the performance of whatever we've chosen as well. What does good look like? How do we know it's good? What are we measuring to make sure it's good? Have some base KPIs, right? Which basically say things like, how can we ensure that people are being actually represented? What do we need to look at to measure? Is there a number we can follow, right? That says, okay, we think the country is 87% represented now. How do we push it up, right? Those kinds of things. And to, then also think about how the other bits of how not only decisions are made in Parliament, but how accountability happens too. So all the things about second jobs, about interests in other companies, friends who get PPE contracts, all that stuff. We need to incentivize the right things and de-incentivize the wrong things, and then also look at the policymaking process as well. I would love to see, again, because I'm a nerd and I think along these lines, I would like to see some sort of framework that policy is designed using that incorporates things like performance, right? Incorporates things like user needs. Is it addressing the needs of people properly? Not just, did the party put it in a manifesto and are they going to force it through because they won an election based on it, apparently, right? But something that actually connects to the delivery of that policy, how the outcomes of that policy have actually worked, and then feeding back up the chain and go, oh, turns out that policy is a load of crap, because look how many people it's screwed over, So some sort of feedback loop, I think, could be massively important. That is kind of like an external framework that they don't get to decide to listen to or not. It's incorporated into it, because otherwise they just fight all day. I mean, that's the thing we hate, isn't it?
Yeah.
So
but that, I think, is part of the fun. I mean, without fighting, I mean,
something to comment on.
Yeah. I mean, I often look at and it's always like from Romania or Bulgaria or like one of the Baltic states, but you see their parliament, and there was someone recently who, like, they were talking about them, and he literally just comes out from the audience, just goes and just starts a fight right in the house. You're like, that hasn't happened yet in the House of Commons, but it's probably
no shoes being thrown either. Do you remember the shoe throwing incident? I can't remember where that was, but that was
that was in Iraq against George Bush. Well, no, it was an Iraqi journalist against George Bush.
Was that right? Is that okay? I'm misremembering that. I mean, civil conversation. Wouldn't that be wouldn't that be nice? I mean, the PMQs, they've just they know what questions are coming. They've written a script and they just stand there and perform it, and it's like, it's not real. None of this is real.
Yeah, I think PMQs is something I'd sort of like to see change, but Tony Blair himself did change PMQs, because PMQs, I think, used to be like once a month, and then he changed it to it being sort of once a week. So things like that can be changed, but it's sort of how what do you change it to? Do you change it to like maybe like it's an MP lottery, every MP gets a number, and then you have a big lotto machine. roll out Guinevere this week.
I was thinking the other day, like in the Senate in America, the president isn't there, but they are always talking at the president, and like, it's, at least we have the guy in the room. I think that's really. Can you imagine if Biden had to stand there and like take questions? I think that would be amazing.
Yeah, from MGT about the space laces.
Yeah. But so at least we do have that. But like, all this stuff is just performative, and it does my head in. Yeah, I'm not going to say burn it all down, but like, it needs so drastic but common sense stuff done to it.
So we have been talking now for over an hour. We haven't yet covered your website. So.
I didn't come here to do the promo. Damn it. Okay. All right.
So let's have a look. If I press my magic button, whoop, there we go.
Yeah. So I imagine everyone has seen this, right? Everyone's seen this already, because it's going like wildfire. So yeah, last year, 500,000 people put their postcode into this to find out who to vote for in the local elections. This year, see, obviously that is a thing, but we're also we have the mayor elections as well, London Assembly, all councils that have a full election. councils that have by-elections. So there'll be some where there's just like 1 or 2 wards where there's a seat up. Police and crime commissioners coming soon once we've crunched the data, hopefully. And then our poor Scott Benton's seat, he had to go, didn't he? So there's that by-election as well. Also coming soon. That's going to be quite easy. We just literally haven't built the page for it.
Yeah.
So yeah, we're trying to cover a lot more this time. At the same time, it's actually a smaller election than last year, so the overall numbers might end up being smaller for us, which is a bit disappointing. But again, we're using it as an awareness exercise to get people in the frame of mind that tactical voting is a thing. Yeah. So I like looking at there's a few councils where it looks like they kind of got the message. It's really interesting. Havant is one of them. So in Havant, these are the wards. Is this what you wanted, by the way? A little bit of a tour?
Oh yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So let's say looking in Cowplain here, right? What we're saying is there's 3 seats up for election in the Cowplain ward, and our recommendation is that one of them is green, one of them is red, and one of them is Lib Dem. So if I click through on that, it will tell you exactly what that means. Very, very clearly, vote 1, vote 2, vote 3. I hope it's clear. We would love some feedback on how usable this all is, because my God, it's difficult. Looks way nicer on mobile, by the way, because it all kind of stacks up nicely. And we have about 75% people use it on mobile. So what I think happened in this ward is that they knew there were 3 seats up. I think it's a Tory held ward. And so they thought, well, let's not split the vote. Let's put one of us each up. And then we'll get all the votes for that come in, essentially. And I think that's what they did. And if you look down at the information, it's fairly even between them. So if Labour, Lib Dems, and Green had all put up 3 candidates in this ward, chances are the Tories would have won it again, right? So I think they got the memo in this place, and it's really interesting to see. At every moment, we're trying to remind people to get their voter ID as well and that kind of stuff.
Yeah. I'm interested to see what impact voter ID is going to really have, because we obviously had it 1 council election already, and I don't think it was, at least from what I've seen, I don't think it was fully clear how much of an impact it had.
It's hard to measure,
but I think as we go forward, I think maybe we'll start to see what an impact it has. But like I say, please do remember your photo ID when you go to vote.
The numbers were really quite worrying. I think it was the Electoral Commission that did some polling recently. We're not polling, like the type of research they're able to do because of the data they have with the census and registration and stuff, that showed there's about 8 million people missing from the electoral register, meaning they could vote. They are eligible to register, but they're not. So that's 8 million. And then the other figure is that they think that there are 5 million people that don't have the right ID. So they might have some ID, but not necessarily the right ID. So we have a few things that we're trying to say to people about voter ID. First thing is, get it now, and then you'll be able to use it for the general election as well. There is what's called a authority certificate, voter authority certificate you can get if you have no other forms of ID. Get that. Second thing is, take all your ID, right?
Yeah.
Take as many forms of ID as you've got. These people that are at the polling booths checking your ID, they're getting some training, but they might turn away things that are valid, and it's not their fault. It's just that they're under-resourced, right? So take everything you have. I think that's really important. And then for students as well, make sure you can register in the right place. If there's an October election, you can register in 2 different ways. Sorry, you can register in only one place, but you have 2 choices of where you can register. You can register at your hometown or your uni town. We're going to hopefully create a platform called Student Voter, which helps you work out where to most efficiently register for a tactical vote, but get your ID as well. Some ID might be tied to the location as well. It's a bit ambiguous on some forms of ID, whether it only is valid locally or nationally. But those are some scary numbers. And I think it was about 40,000 people, wasn't it, that were turned away last year in the local elections. Compare that to the number of people that have been accused of voter fraud. 6.
1, I think.
6 in total, 1 conviction.
Yeah.
Right. The real problem this country has is not voter fraud; it's electoral fraud, right? Because in 2015, quite well documented, there was the election expenses scandal where the Tories overspent. The Leave campaign as well. There was also potential spending issues with them. That's where the real issues are. Looking at the parties, we have a pencil and we cross our cross on a piece of paper. That's an incredibly hard thing, weirdly. And Tom Scott, if you know Tom Scott, the YouTuber, has some incredible videos about why digital voting is a bad idea. Pencil on paper is one of the most secure ways of doing an election. Like, there is so little opportunity for fraud that it just doesn't happen at scale, or at all, in fact, right? So yeah, get your ID, show up. Don't let people stop you showing up. Get a postal vote as well. If you don't want to go down to the polling station, or you can't leave your home for some reason, get a postal vote.
That's something worth bringing up, actually. If you do forget your ID, don't let them turn you away until you actually physically get to the point where they're giving you your poll card, because that's when it gets registered. If they turn you away at any other point, you do not end up on that list. So even if you go and you forget your card, stay in line until you get to that point. Don't let anyone else turn you away, because otherwise you don't get registered as a number then.
Yeah, it's the people sitting at the table in the polling booth, if there is a table, but the ones that check you off, they're the ones that are meant to check your ID. If you get checked outside, they are not the right people to be doing it. They could be anyone. Go inside the polling station. And so the last thing on a postal vote is that actually you can hand in a postal vote at the polling station without your ID as well. So you can do that on the day too. So if you don't have ID, but you can get a postal vote, do that, take it in. And they'll take it. Yeah.
Oh, hang on. Thank you very much, Maggie Pie. Yep. Tories need to go though as soon as humanly possible. I think we all very, very much agree on that one as well.
Could not agree more. I mean, how much time do we have? There was a question that came up earlier about how do we pivot from being a tactical voting campaign to a proportional representation campaign?
Oh yes, yeah.
So. Right here,
I've got the rest of the day free, so I could be a
we'll carry on. Fair enough. So, obviously, tactical voting, is going to work, but basically, this is a comms and marketing exercise. This whole thing is a marketing exercise. Tactical voting is kind of clickbait in many ways, right? But it is actually something that's going to help you right now too. But it sucks. You should be able to vote with your heart. That's the thing, right? Yes, we're going to do it now, but you shouldn't have to. You should be able to vote for what you want. So that's the marketing piece of it, right? Then the other piece of it is essentially, well, aren't you just handing the next government, a huge majority and all that kind of stuff, right? So the really simple version of that is we need to make it known that our votes are being lent, right? We are lending our votes to the next party purely to get the Tories out, because that's our only option under the current system, right? That's it. It's a complicated message in some ways, right? But I couldn't vote for my heart, but I wanted to get rid of those people. And so, look, I have to lend you my vote. Now, the thing is, often that goes ignored because, like I said, that happens so often at general elections anyway. Yeah, where we're not convinced by anyone, but we fucking can see the fascists, excuse my language, and so we show up to get them out, don't we? I'm going to ruin your YouTube advertising now, aren't I?
Oh, it's all right. We're past the 10-minute mark.
Past
so
that.
Yeah, it doesn't.
So that happens all the time. We just need that to be acknowledged, and we do that by doing it at scale. Best for Britain, another campaign, did some research that showed 13 million people could be lending their votes right in this election. That's basically what the parties get in votes. We just need to turn that community of people into a movement, and then say, hello, we're here, we lent you our votes, and here's the important bit: you're going to need to earn our vote next time, right? Because we did your job for you. Basically, we showed up to vote those people out, right? Voters won this election, not a party. And that needs to be the message. Now, in the media, they won't do that, right? They'll basically be saying, oh, look, Labour won, everyone voted for Labour, because it's just like surface level, isn't it?
Yep.
So how do they earn our votes? Well, we spend collectively, if we've got those 13 million people, wouldn't that be a mailing list, right? If we've got those 13 million people, for 5 years, we can be saying, remember me, I'm the one that voted you in, yeah, there's potentially going to be 200 new Labour MPs, aren't there? You know, if you look at the extreme outcomes, those 200 Labour MPs are on very tenuous ground. They won their seats often, you know, I'm not going to say everyone, but a lot of them will have won their seats purely because they weren't the Tory. You know, now they've got to perform. This is the Biden issue, isn't it? Right?
Yep.
He won basically because he wasn't Trump.
Yep.
You know,
it's you're right. It's in America at the moment. It's Biden has done a lot of good stuff, but he's really struggling to sort of get that message across that, you know, he's done a lot of this stuff, especially in the labor relations board as well, with workers' rights and stuff like that. He's done a lot of fantastic work on there. It just hasn't, unfortunately, seemed to broken through yet.
And it also just isn't enough, you know. And you know, are Labour going to be better? Of course they are, right? Of course they are. It's going to be incredibly hard not to be better than this government.
Yeah.
Are they going to be better enough, right?
Yeah.
Well, that's for us to lobby them for, right? And the thing is, if we can show at scale that, you know, we showed up for this, for all the bold but common sense things, the goal is really that should undermine the media narrative that often parties listen to and say, no, ignore that. Right, it's us you should be listening to. We're the ones that actually voted, and in that sense, it's a bit like a union, right? It's a union, but it's like non-affiliated, and it's not attached to work, and we don't take subs. You know, although we do have a crowdfunder, obviously. You know, like, who doesn't have a crowdfunder? You know, but as a union, you have collective political power, don't you? Right? You can use your votes. That's a big carrot and it's a big stick. You know, so ultimately, these 200 new MPs, we're going to relentlessly be saying, look, we voted you in and we want some stuff, right? And the way you can do that is to make our votes count next time, right? That's basically it. And if they do that, chances are they'll win their seat again, won't they? You know, so that's the incentive.
I mean, it's not rocket science.
It's really not. It's really not. Votes of power. They know it, right? Otherwise, we wouldn't have this. You know, they wouldn't be trying to take our votes away, as they say, right? And they come out asking for our votes. Sadiq Khan, in his messaging, has been saying, lend me your vote. He gets it. Right, he knows that people are lending him his vote, and he hasn't been able to convince everyone that he's the guy. But people know that, like, if we don't have him, we have some nut job instead. You know, and he's like, yeah, lend me my vote. We'll keep that nut job out. But the point is, him saying that out loud also acknowledges that he now has to earn your trust and your vote next time. You know, it's a really, really interesting step, and I admire him for saying that out loud. It's a difficult thing.
We do have a super chat just come in, so I'm just going to highlight that again. Thank you very much, Maggie Pie. Yep, Tory fascist. Yep, just calling a spade a spade. So excellent.
There's
Thank
a
you very
checklist.
much.
Yeah, sorry.
But yeah, is there anything else sort of you want to talk about or anything like that?
I would so. One of the things that we're trying to do is to really make this feel like it's everybody's, right? You know, Ollie, I want this to, you know, I want you to feel like this is your campaign too, right? I'm not saying everyone should just join up, but, like, you know, we want to make sure that a campaign that's trying to fight for representation actually is representative as well. You know, that makes sense. You know, and so we're trying to keep a good balance there, but we want to include people in it too. For any campaign, having a large number of people that want to do stuff for you is just such an incredible privilege, but you've got to work out how to do it, you know. So we obviously are going to be doing posters and flyers. You can go to the movementforward.com. There's a resources link, and there'll be a poster you can download, which is a bit pointed poster, but you know, it's the first one. We'll see how it goes. But then also we've got a Discord as well. So you can come to our Discord. If you go to themovementforward.com, again, you'll see a link down in the footer to our Discord, which is where we're trying to get people who've got all sorts of ideas together. Yeah, shall I scroll down and link to that? Yep. Yeah, so actually on the StopTheToriesVote website, if you click on volunteer, you'll get to that as well. So here's our volunteering for posters and flyers. So if you do that, we'll send you all the new posters when they come up and flyers, and you can go and put those up around your area. And then Creatives, which is our Discord, is a place for anyone who might have any kind of idea. You don't have to have the skills. You know, you can just say, hey, why don't you do a poster that has this on it? Or why don't you do a video that talks about this? You know, this is your place. Come and join our Discord. And then, yeah, I can't remember if I got a link straight through to our posters. Yeah, we go, resources. This is our poster. I don't know if that's gone through. We're not even looking at that website, are we? It's gone to a different tab. Oh well.
So,
So yeah, go to the movementforward.com. You'll find it all anyway. Let's do this. There we go. Right down to the bottom. Resources. Here's our poster. Boom.
Yep.
Yeah, so that we want to try and extend our reach. You know, the parties are able to spend £35 million each in the general election. Do you want to have a guess what we're allowed to spend? It's way less than that, and we don't have it.
Probably less. What 3,000? I think it's something like that. I think.
So you have a per constituency spending limit, and in total for an organisation like us, we're allowed to spend £702,000 across the entire UK. We're probably not going to be campaigning in Northern Ireland, so that will reduce it a little bit. But it's about 2% of the parties, basically. So we have to rely on people doing our marketing with us, you know, rather than buying time on the TV and the newspapers. So posters is where it's at, I think. There you go. There's a bit of a pitch.
There we go. Yeah, one question. I think this is the real $1 million question. I think we're all asking. What would be the ideal election timing to maximize the tactical vote? Does it matter or not really?
Wow. So the next 40 minutes of this conversation will be, when's the next election?
Yeah.
Right? It always takes up the time. So like for me, weirdly, I want it a bit later. That gives us more time to build up our numbers. But then that's not necessarily optimal, is it? A winter election never really works out very well in terms of turnout. The latest it can be, as we all know, is mid to late January, isn't it?
Yeah. January the 25th, I think is, yeah.
Yeah. So, and that's only because it has to be called at least the last date 5 years after the previous election was held. There's some rumor that it might well be called in July, depending on how many boats have got stopped and how many flights to Rwanda have happened. I think that's absolute nonsense, but they might go for it because who knows?
As I said at the beginning, I think it's local elections. I think that's going to cause the panic amongst the Tories. They're going to see, oh my God, I lost this amount of councillors. If I translate this into a general election, that's how many votes I would lose. I'm looking at staring down the barrel of the gun. I'm going to, lose my seat. What reason do I have to be loyal to Rishi Sunak? Chaos ensues.
Yeah.
Steal
the chandeliers on the way out, kind of thing.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Cats and dogs, all raining down, chaos.
But that's the other side of it, though. So, is there an optimal time for them? I don't think there is really anymore. As Phil Morehouse, as friend of the channel, will say, there's no safe seat left, right? And like, not if we have anything to do with it, basically, right? This is the very point of this project. So July, I think, is unlikely, but they are mad, so who knows? It's more likely to be October, I expect. October has the potential to disenfranchise students as well, and so that might be the time. Summer is a hard one for anyone, and also they kind of all like having holidays, right? There was some rumours that a bunch of Tory MPs were coming together to say, look, can you have one before summer? I'd kind of like the summer off rather than have to campaign all summer. I kind of believe that too, right? But really, we're all looking at the Conservatives, and what's their main thing right now? Corruption. Yeah. Corruption, as they would say on the trawl, Gemma and Marina. So they need as long as possible to, extract as much as they can, essentially. I think some people say, well, there's not much left, is there? But there are still some very long-term contracts that you can put the government into that basically, are a golden goose that keeps on giving. You look at the, stuff with Infosys, for example, Palantir as well. All these people are shareholders in hedge funds that probably have shares in these companies. And if you go into a 7 or 10-year contract, that is our tax money being spent on a contract that we probably won't need, and certainly would want to get rid of if it wasn't delivering, but we can't because we've got a 7-year contract and they're sitting pretty. So for the next 6 months, what other long-term contracts could come up that we, that the country has entered into, that don't even necessarily deliver anything? I think that's an opportunity that they won't want to miss. So if I was them, I'd be, spending my time looking at what other opportunities there are like that. So that would mean later in the year, I expect. They know they're done. So it's just all about how they can efficiently use their time now. The question, though, for just going back to the question was, is there a most efficient time for us? I do think October, even though there's the student risk. So there's a huge need to make sure that students register in the right place. But also we need the next 3 or 4 months to really build up our numbers. If they're listening to this, they'll be like, okay, so we'll do it earlier.
A question, actually. I think this might actually be something with it as well from Maggie Pye. How can I help you if I'm not in the UK? And I think that's an interesting question, actually.
Yeah. Well, so there are now, of course, more voters that are expats as well. I don't know if that's Maggie Pye's situation. So there's the potential need for a big campaign to get expats to vote. I think that's really important. There's rumours that the Tories are currently harvesting expat proxy votes. They literally have a team for that, apparently. So that's going on. But also, we just need good ideas as well, right? I would love to be able to get to some sort of 3-word slogan. I don't think that's going to be possible, but you never know. So if you've got ideas for that kind of stuff, join in the Discord and help out.
Well, I'd say if you know anyone who is a British expat and where you live, get them to register to vote as well, and get them voting. I think that's something, because obviously if you're not a UK national and you can't vote, I think that's probably one of the best ways you can help, making sure that you're getting any British expat voting in this election. So get them on board. Get them.
There's also a European-wide issue right now in that we need people to show up in the EU elections as well. We can't vote in those anymore, but we could encourage people across Europe to be voting in those elections on our behalf, almost, right? Yep. Show up for us, because we don't like fascism either, even though it might look like it. So please show up and protect the rest of Europe for us as well. And I think that would be a really good signal that we're still here, right? And that we have a future intention. Yeah. But ultimately, this is a large digital movement. Often I say that the difference between now and 1997, which was when the last time the Labour Party, obviously won the election away from the Conservatives, is the internet. That's the difference. The difference is the internet. Let's use it. Let's get all Mr. Robot on it and actually, use the internet to, not only win the election, but win it for us, and make sure that we have political power next.
Yeah. Let's get Elon Musk on side. What a coup that would be.
Well, yeah. That's the bind, isn't it? We're using all these platforms that other people ultimately control. Yeah. We need to get young people really involved as well. I'm not a young person, as you can see, but we have an amazing group of supporters that are all across social media. But there are 15.5 million potential voters under 35 in this country. That's bigger than any party has received in the recent elections. They could just show up and dominate, literally just take over. There are 2.5 million, 2.4 million new voters that were too young to vote in 2019. They again could show up and dominate. So we need to reach these people that actually depend on the future of our politics, and give them a reason to get involved. And it is every single reason, basically.
Yep. No, I agree with that 100%. Yeah,
I've been practicing. Can you tell?
Getting them out.
Yeah.
It's just getting them out to vote is of course always the big problem and the $1 million question. And I think we all wish we had the magic bullet to sort of do that.
Yeah, exactly. People like power, though, right?
Yeah, that's true. That's very true. I think that's something else that I think probably all parties should look at, getting more young people to actually stand in Parliament, in elections as well. I think that would be very good. But local elections, very, very hard. And that's why, especially at local elections, you see a lot of old retirees. And of course, you see businessmen who can afford to go and take days out to sort of do all the council stuff that they need to do. It's why you don't see a lot of young people running for council positions, because it takes up a lot of free time. And of course, as a councillor, you don't get paid. Now you get expenses back, but you don't get paid the same way an MP gets paid. And I think that's something that should happen, that councillors should get paid. I think it's an issue that should happen. Yeah.
I mean, this goes back to our conversation earlier about disenfranchisement and access to society, right? Like everyone should have the opportunity and the capability and capacity to be able to stand for any elected position, right? And if they can't, because they might not be able to pay their rent, then that is excluding people from the political process, basically.
Yeah.
So yeah, everyone should have the chance, right? Yeah, fully agree. But yeah, the message is basically young people, show up and take over. I'll help you do it, right? That's basically,
Yeah, pretty much. And it's like, yeah, get out and vote, or else your vote doesn't get heard. And I think, it's often the difficult thing to sort of subscribe. As talking to someone as an individual, saying, your vote matters. If you go out and vote, your vote matters. And I think, well, Russell Brand did a lot of damage back in the day. I think used to, espousing that message. What's the point of going out and voting? And then he met Ed Miliband and changed his mind.
Well, yeah, and then probably went in all sorts of other directions since then.
Yeah, now,
But no, this is right. I mean, if you look at the what the parties are talking about and what your local politicians are talking about, they tend to talk about the things that people that show up care about, right? So if they're not talking to you, it's because they actually don't think you're going to show up anyway. It's very chicken and egg. It's very frustrating. So yeah, if there's no policies for young people coming up in manifestos, it's because they know that young people aren't going to show up. It's really disheartening. Yeah, like in many ways, I would love to make this whole campaign all about young people. The Kurt Vonnegut book, Slaughterhouse-Five. The subtitle of that book is The Children's Crusade, right? And about how no one should have to go through World War II like they did ever again. Basically, that's what that whole book for me was all about. But like the message, it really is like quite difficult, isn't it? Because there's so much apathy and nihilism, and like, what the hell should I bother for? They've never done anything for me in the past. And that's almost the point. They've never done anything for you in the past, so let's take over. Right? They're sure as hell not going to do anything for your future. Look at it. Like
I think that's the big thing we've got to fight, is the apathy, and just get really people out. And I think you've just got honestly, sometimes it feels you're just going to go out on people and just like slap them in the face, just go vote.
Yeah, I mean the other thing is that a vote actually is a legal mechanism to change something. A protest and a petition has no power. They're very good for showing there's a lot of support for a topic, and they're very good for building community and movements, but they can't actually pull the levers of power, right? A vote does. A vote is that little bit at the end where you have some actual agency and some control. So if you've been going on XR protests, or the Enough is Enough stuff, or Just Stop Oil, or any of these things, show up and vote as well, right? I mean, I would just say like, join a movement that uses its votes too, right? And that's what we are. We're the bit at the end, right? We're the call to action at the end about voting. So you've done all that other stuff. We've got the topics on the agenda. We know we're in the majority. We know what we care about. Now we need to show up and collectively vote for it as well. I mean, the first step to do that is to vote out the people that are clearly not going to do anything about any of this stuff, and then say, look, this is our agenda. This is what we showed up for. So we're the extension of the other campaigns. There you go. There's a new pitch.
I'm actually interested, because we had a brief conversation about this when at the time when it happened. I think it was on Labour Social when Keir Starmer got glittered.
Oh yeah.
And of course, then we got the campaign to sort of implement tactical voting, and it was preceded by a letter that was like, we demand that you are going to do this, or else there'll be more glitter.
Yeah, no, exactly. Yeah.
Do you think that that's a confusion between, as you said, between protesting and what voting actually is, and what it can mean?
I think you absolutely need to do both, right? Protest is a really important thing. I was at the poll tax protests, back in, what was that, 1990? I always forget exactly what year it was. We got out just before the horses came in, but it was my first experience of like that kind of thing, and it was incredibly important. And I feel like, we've had some huge protests in this country against the Iraq War, for example. 1 million people marched on that. All the pro-EU, anti-Brexit protests, really, really important, not really covered very much, but huge. I was involved in some of those back in 2016, 2017, again, working with organizations like Best for Britain. Then in my past as well, I used to work at Comic Relief, and we did the Make Poverty History campaign, where everyone had the white bands, if you remember people wearing white bands.
I remember that, yeah.
And we organized marches then around the world, with the One campaign, which was Bono's version of that in America. I think it was Bono, yeah. So, there have been all these marches, and they're incredibly important to try and get issues, out into the wild and into the mainstream, and to connect people together. But yeah, my criticism and the motivation behind all this is to say, okay, that's great, but if we don't vote, then actually we need to join the dots, because those protests won't get listened to unless they come with the big carrot and a big stick, essentially, using the legal mechanism we have to take control of the country. Do you know what I mean?
One of the other big challenges that I think is going to come up in this is what we saw with the sort of the pro-Palestinian protests, is a lot of people saying, we aren't going to vote for you.
Yeah.
What would be your sort of response to someone who is sort of saying that from that position?
I think Gaza is and Palestine and Israel, the whole thing. To simplify, it's a wedge issue, right? To complicate it, obviously, there's huge humanitarian issue that's going on right now, and has been going on for the last 70 years or so, right? Longer than that, there's a lot of simplification of that issue, and there's a lot of projection about it as well. There's a lot of division on it. There's a lot of huge amount of manipulation in the media about what's really going on with it as well. The right-wing press, calling them terrorist marches that are going on in London, for example. It's just absolute nonsense, of course.
Yeah,
right?
There was the whole thing recently about a guy trying to cause trouble. I think Channel 4 showed recently that the new footage, new angles of police constantly saying, "Hey, you're running into this protest. You're causing trouble."
Yeah.
So that was a whole attempt to sort of, I think, sort of build up a really false media narrative. There was something I covered today by an absolute right-wing grifter who was recently blaming aid agencies for a lot of the deaths in Gaza, and that got me really heckled up.
It's just,
it's I think it really is as you said, there's a wedge issue here, and sometimes you've got to look at a bigger picture. And I think it's when you look at America, because who's going to be better for Palestine? Is it going to be Donald Trump, or is it going to be Joe Biden? And ultimately, it is Joe Biden. I mean, you look at all the bad stuff Trump has said. Even his family member, I think Jared Kushner, his son-in-law talked about, oh, look at all that amazing beachfront property opportunity that Israel now has. That's who would be in power if you do not get out and vote. So there are cases where I think it is in America that is going to be very, very vital that you stop Trump. But when it comes to here in the UK, you're right, it's completely kettle of fish. It is I think it does become a wedge issue at that point. But it's getting people to sort of realize that, I think, sometimes.
Yeah, and now I'm just going to say, oh, you love Biden, right? You love Biden.
Yeah.
Like, no, unfortunately, this is just a binary choice we have. In this country, a lot of you got to remember that we have a party system. We're not electing a president, okay? And like I said earlier, there's going to be 200 new MPs potentially.
You're not just electing Keir Starmer; you're electing all the Labour Party as a whole.
Yeah, and people are like, oh, I could never vote for Starmer. It's like, oh, are you in his constituency? Because that's your choice, obviously. But if you're not, and you've got a Tory who's been helping the corruption happen and actually set up a lot of the the issues we're facing in this country, probably want to get rid of them. And then also the tactical voting point is that it's not just Labour. In a lot of places, it's going to be a Lib Dem that you vote for. In fact, in this election, there's a really high chance, and I don't want to give too much away, but there'll be more than one Green that we'll be saying that it'll be safe to vote for, right? Because we're doing our algorithms a little bit differently to however tactical voting websites work. That's a whole other conversation. So the point is, you're not voting for Starmer. Now, yes, he will be the Prime Minister. At this point, I don't think there's any way around that, right? Because again, we have this binary choice. Keir Starmer's going to be the next prime minister. There'll be a Labour-led government in some form. If it's a coalition, he'll still be the prime minister, right? Is there a movement to get him out of the Labour Party? I haven't seen one, right? That requires, actual, parliamentarians in the Labour Party to do that. I haven't seen that happening. Until that happens, again, he's going to be the prime minister. It's a crappy choice that we just have this one or the other kind of choice, absolutely. But the point is, they are going to be in power, and at that point, we get to hold them to account. Gaza is not the only issue that we're being divided on. There are many issues that we're being divided on, and every single one we get divided on, we're just fighting this thing right in front of our faces. And often they're incredibly important, real, valid fights. Of course they are, but we're not solving them because we're not thinking about the longer picture, where we are, potentially, just letting the even worse people just laugh at us, and continue to have all the power. So
that's it. You've got to look at who you're voting for and if you don't vote, who might get in.
Yeah,
and sometimes the alternative can be worse.
There's a movement in America at the moment in the Democratic primaries, which I can't remember if that's come up or not, but believe it or not, there are Democratic primaries going on to choose who the Democratic presidential candidate will be. Obviously it's going to be Biden, but on the ballot paper, there is a tick box that says uncommitted. And there's a movement of people in America ticking that box. And it's got up to about 20% on average in the states where it's happened. So what that is basically saying is, because it's quite safe in a primary to do this, it's a protest, right? It says, look, I'm going to get Trump out. I'm going to show up and I'm going to vote you in and I'm going to get Trump out. But I didn't necessarily want you to be the leader of this party and the next president. It's a really interesting moment. And I think with tactical voting, we can replicate that in a way, right? We can say, look, we are an anti-Tory movement. We showed up against the Tories. We acknowledge you're going to be the next government, but you don't get a free pass. You don't get to say that we just voted for you. We voted you in. And in fact, look at all those Lib Dems that just got in as well, right? And so the point is then to say, and now we have to hold you account. You have to earn these votes next time. Because this might be controversial, but the Labour Party is going to be slightly better than the Tory Party, right? Which is a crap thing to want as an improvement at all. But it's how it works right now. Now the thing is, votes have power. Smart voters have even more power. If you're using your vote to create a certain outcome, which is the movement we're putting together, that is really hard to ignore. I would love to have a very, very positive spin on this, right? Rather than a threatening negative spin. And the positive spin is, look at all this incredible stuff that we want. It's your opportunity to give it to us, and we will show up for it if you do, right? That's kind of how you think the system works, right? But we're explicitly saying it, and the idea there is it makes it safe to do these things, because we can show how many of us there are. And it's like, ignore the Daily Mail, forget them. They're not actually in control of the electorate. We showed up together as our own electoral, community. We have power now. You can do this stuff. Don't worry about it. It's all good.
Yeah, I've talked about this before, and I think we talked about in Labour Social about the possibility of creating a progressive voting bloc.
Yeah,
within the next sort of Labour Parliament, and that sort of bloc being very, very powerful.
Come join in.
Sorry.
No, I mean, this is it. This is what we are. I mean, I don't use the word progressive, but I try to stay away from all labels because they all mean different things to different people. But yes, that's essentially what we are. We are a voting bloc. I think voting bloc is a bit of a technical term, so I don't use it very much. But voting community, or if it was inside a party, you might call it a caucus, I suppose. But that's more like elected people. But yeah, that's it. We're a progressive voting bloc. We're independent. We're the independent alternative political, campaign to be part of, basically. And I feel like for a lot of people that feel they just have to, if they want to get involved in any of this, they have to join a party. Well, now you don't, right? Now you don't. There you go. Because I think we all kind of want this. We all are sick of, having to have the fight, basically. It's like, well, they need our votes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we've almost been going 2 hours at this point. But no, I've very, very much enjoyed this. I think it's been a very, very good conversation. So like I say, I hope you've sort of enjoyed yourself too. But is there anything
Very
else
much.
You want to cover before we depart?
No, yeah, no, thanks so much for having me on. And I really hope that everyone watching has enjoyed it. I've tried to keep an eye on the chat. I've missed a few things, I'm sure. But yeah, no, thanks again. And
have I converted you away from OBS to StreamYard?
well, we'll have to see. I mean, I'm still using OBS to put my webcam into here, so.
Oh, you don't even need OBS to do it. You can just do it. StreamYard just does it for you.
Oh no, I know. But I've got a green screen up and like.
Oh well. Again, does it through StreamYard? This is all through StreamYard.
Fair enough.
But yeah, no, absolutely. Thank you very much, Josh, for joining us today. It's been an absolutely fantastic conversation. I've enjoyed it very much.
Awesome.
I'm looking forward. We'll probably end up on Labour Social come election night, because I'm sure we will be having election night social. That's going to be, I think, a very, very long haul.
Yeah, we've been thinking about doing something similar, but I imagine Labour Social will be the place to go for that. So.
Yeah. And like I say, I've got, I can stream to multiple locations. So which I have been sort of now at this moment. So hello to everyone on Twitter and of course Facebook as well, not just the YouTube audience. So thank you very much for everyone joining me today. Please do help spread the message. Click on like, click on the share button. I have left a link down to Movement Forward website and Stop the Tories website down below in the comments. You'll see a little bit.ly link. So go click on that, go check them out, go sign up, go spread the word. As we said earlier on, I know we've got a couple of non-UK people in the chat as well. If you know anyone who is an expat, is it 15 years? Is it?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, I
think something like that. If they are within that time frame, do get them sort of signed up, ready to not only it's too late for this local one, but it is sort of still time to get them ready at least for the upcoming general election. That could be whenever, really, at this point.
It's going to be one to remember, I think.
Yeah. So it's get out, get them on board as well, get them signed up. That will be massively helpful if you want to help us as well, if you are not a UK citizen yourself. But also help support us, our channels, help us grow, spread the word, click the like, click the share button, click the links down in the doobly-doo, and all the other good stuff as well. So, as always, thank you very much, Josh, for joining me today. Thank you very much to everyone in chat who's joined in as well. Thank you very much to everyone who's watching. And, of course, as always, we'll see you all next time. Bye.
Cheers. Bye.